So we are going to be talking about thriving with CRPS, a mental wellness approach. And I am Marisol Pérez. I am a licensed clinical social worker. And whoops, let's see. Whoops, I went ahead a little bit. So I have a private practice in North Carolina, which was originally Tuscaroran land, and I am a guest here. And I'm originally from New York City. My pronouns are she, her, and ellas. I am a Latinx American bilingual mental health therapist. I provide therapy in both English and Spanish. And I am also a certified brain spotting practitioner. I'm also trained in EMDR. I'm currently enrolled in sensory motor psychotherapy training. It's a 6-month-long training for the level 1, and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm also a fellow CRPS thriver. I've had CRPS since 2012. And along with CRPS, like many people, I also have several other chronic pain conditions. And in my private practice, my specialty areas are chronic illness and complex trauma. And combining those two together, I specialize in something that's called chronic illness-induced trauma. So really chronic illness and complex trauma combined is this. And I'll explain a little bit more moving forward. What does that mean? So in order for us to talk a little bit about what is thriving with CRPS, it's important to understand a little bit what is trauma. And this is a definition from SAMHSA. I really appreciate it because it captures a holistic perspective of trauma. And that definition is that trauma results from an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. And part of my work as a therapist, but also as someone that has CRPS, is in destigmatizing the word trauma, because sometimes when we think of the word trauma, we may, cringe, or there's just so much social stigma around this word. And I find that this definition really captures is that a trauma can be so many things for so many people. And it's a stressful event that really impacts all parts of our life. And so what is chronic illness-induced trauma? And this is a pretty new area of focus in our field that I really appreciate, because it says here, it's the result of chronic illness. And I'm just going to go back 1 second and share with you this definition again. And it says it's an event or series of events or set of circumstances. So typically when we think of trauma, it's usually an external situation. It can be a car accident, it can be a surgery, it can be another person that caused trauma. So trauma is typically known as something that's external. But with chronic illness-induced trauma, our body is the source of the trauma. And so the source of the trauma is internal. And because the source of the trauma is coming from our body, it doesn't have a definite endpoint. Typically, an external trauma has a beginning point and an end point. Even when it is chronic, it does have some type of an endpoint periodically, let's say. And with chronic illness-induced trauma, that doesn't really happen. And it's also difficult to remove ourselves from the trigger when the actual trigger may be our own body. So what are some of the symptoms of trauma? And these are general symptoms. They're not exclusive. this can be different for everyone. So some symptoms are intrusive or ruminating thoughts, distressing dreams, feelings of anger, guilt, fear, and shame, emotional numbing, distorted cognitions, lack of interest, excessive worry, low mood. The symptoms on the left are more um, uh, mental health related symptoms. And the symptoms on the right are more behavioral symptoms. So those look like irritability, hypervigilance, difficulty concentrating, sleep disturbance, social isolation, dissociation, and changes in eating patterns. And it may be helpful to hone in a little bit more on dissociation. Sometimes when providers or people experiencing dissociation, there may be some sort of like a distress when we hear about that word dissociation. What does that mean? What happens? How do we help somebody? And the truth is that dissociation happens when the body is trying to protect ourselves from something, from a trigger. And so that's the body's natural protective response. And so I hope to dismantle any fears or stigmas around dissociation, because it's okay and it's understandable for there to be some dissociation sometimes. And so when in relationship to CRPS, sometimes dissociation can look like disconnecting from the body part where CRPS originated from, or getting upset with that body part, literally wanting that body part to be separate from the self. So I hope that that clarifies a little bit about dissociation. Something else that's not on here in terms of symptoms of trauma, we can also sometimes experience physical symptoms like panic attacks, um, or our heart palpitating pretty quickly, or our hands sweating, and that's totally understandable as well. And when we're talking about trauma and CRPS, it's important to talk about the nervous system. This is a very simplified version of the nervous system. Throughout the convention, you all have heard different speakers speak about the nervous system. And so there are two general parts of the nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So with the sympathetic nervous system, that's the body's fight or flight response. Our respiration and heart rate increases. Our adrenaline and other stress hormones are also released. And this nervous system is a protective nervous system. It's meant to turn on as a way to help support us and protect us. And it's totally automatic. And then we have here the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the body's rest and digest response. And in this nervous system, the body is relaxed. We are calm. The respiration and heart rate decreases. And this is sort of where we want to sort of try to be, what our goal is with CRPS and with trauma. Because with both, the sympathetic nervous system gets sort of turned on, they're trying to protect us. And yeah, so now we're going to talk about what does it mean to thrive with CRPS. And it was important for me to talk a little bit about the nervous system, because that's one part, but we are whole beings. So when we think about living with CRPS, sometimes we can separate things, separate the type of care that we're getting, or it's understandable to tackle different things, but we really want to integrate the care. We want to take care of all parts of ourselves, including our mental wellness. And so thriving with CRPS, we want to think about the mind, the body, and the spirit, all parts of ourselves. This slide is only a photograph, but it can be its own presentation. So when we think about the body, we really want to tend to our basic needs. How's our sleep hygiene? How are we eating? Are we hydrating properly? Are we listening to the cues of our body? Are we taking our medication properly? Are we going to our doctor's appointments? When we think about the spirit can be whatever spirit means for you. It can be a higher power, it can be nature, it can be energy, it can be pets. But how's your relationship with spirit? And when we think about the mind, that's the mental wellness part. And so, how are you caring for your mental wellness? Are you checking in with your emotions? Are you seeking support if needed and if it's available to you? And so, throughout the convention, also, different presenters have spoken about the vagus nerve. And I thought that it may be supportive to show a photograph because this is going to be supportive in helping us thrive with CRPS. And so here's the vagus nerve. It starts all the way up here in the brain and it goes all the way down to many organs: the lungs, the heart, the spleen, through the digestive system, the large intestine, small intestine, the kidney. And so there are things that are in our control that we can do to help stimulate this vagus nerve, to help our nervous system go from sympathetic to parasympathetic. And so, what are some of the techniques that are helpful to stimulate the vagus nerve? And hopefully, we'll have some time, to practice some of these. Slow diaphragmatic breathing. There's a technique that's called half a smile. There's also vergence, which is a brain spotting technique that uses the nerve surrounding the eyes, specific movement to stimulate that vagus nerve. And then there's also a humming sound or VU sound from Peter Levine, where since that vagus nerve goes all the way down through our throat, when we say that VU sound, it stimulates that vagus nerve. Oops. And part of the whole self is also building a relationship with yourself. And this can also be its own presentation. I share with my clients that if we were to do one thing, this would be it. Checking in. How am I feeling emotionally today? If my emotions could talk, what would they say? What do they need? Where are these emotions living in my body? And this can take months, even years for people to work on. And it's okay. It's literally getting to know yourself. How's my body feeling at this present moment? And what does it need? And consistency is key. This is also something that I share with my clients a lot. In that it's so important that we are consistent. Sorry, my screen went ahead a little bit. It's so important that we are consistent, taking care of all the parts of ourselves, consistent with our physical health, consistent with our mental health, our spiritual health. And so, am I checking in with myself? And how often? So typically, as I shared, I also have CRPS. I'm not much of a planner. And I'm not much of a planner because I don't really know how I'm going to feel. And so on a regular day-to-day basis, I check in. Hey, self, how are you feeling today? What do you need? And so some other questions can be, am I prioritizing myself and my needs? Am I aware of what my needs are? Am I neglecting a part of myself? And now we've come to the part of some practice techniques. And as I shared with you, hopefully this can be an experiential presentation. And so if you like, this is totally an invitation. Feel free to join me in, let's see how our time is doing, in a few of the practice techniques that can help stimulate that vagus nerve and can help shift our bodies from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system. And so the first one that I hope to introduce to you all is called vergence. And as I shared, vergence is a brain spotting technique. And with vergence, what you're going to do is that you're going to have 2 points. You can have your finger as the first point, or if you have a pen or anything around you that you can sort of just grab. You can also have that. I have a pointer here that I use for brain spotting. And so what you're going to do is either your finger or a pen, feel free to put it a few inches away from your nose, right at eye vision, at eye level. And that's going to be your first point. And then the next point is going to be the farthest point. So for me, my farthest point is at the corner of my room. So what I'm going to do with divergence is that I'm going to flip-flop from one point to another, back and forth, about 3 or 4 seconds at each point. So let's maybe do this for about 2 minutes. So feel free to join me if you feel called to. You also don't have to. So we'll start with the closest point. 4, 2, 3, 4, and the farthest point, 2, 3, 4, and the closest point, 2, 3, 4, and the farthest point, 2, 3, 4, and the closest point, 2, 3, 4, and the farthest point, 2, 3, 4, and the closest point, 2, 3, 4, and the farthest point, 2, 3, 4, and the closest point, 2, 3, 4, and the farthest point, 2, 3, 4, and the closest point, 2, 3, 4, and the farthest point, 2, 3, 4. So this is the divergence technique. Typically you want to do it for maybe about 4 or 5 minutes. You would want to maybe do it a little bit longer than we did it today. So next, maybe we'll try to close. We may have a few minutes for both the half smile and the VU breath. So with the half smile, what you're going to do is literally create a little smile where you can see that right here, your mouth is creasing. And you can also do this in other ways, like anywhere, in your car or just sitting, just like this, having your mouth slightly open. So let's go ahead and do this together for another minute. Just opening your mouth really slightly, relaxing your tongue, noticing any shifts that happen in your body as you're doing this half a smile. And the last technique is a VU breath, and it's literally saying the VU sound as you exhale. I'll show you quickly. It's VU. Really extending your exhale, and feel free to go at your own pace. You don't have to inhale and exhale at my pace. So to get started, feel free to close your eyes or gaze down or leave them just as they are. And maybe you'll notice that you're breathing without necessarily expanding your breath. And whenever you're ready, feel free to join me in maybe 2 VU breaths. As you inhale and as you exhale, and one more time. Welcome back. I know we did these practice techniques pretty quickly, but I hope that they were helpful for you. Here are some resources. I'll also share them in the chat after my presentation and after the panel. So just know that you'll have those accessible. And yeah, thank you all so much. It's such a pleasure and honor to be among other CRPS thrivers. And you can reach me on my Instagram at Peaceful Counseling Therapy, my website, peacefulcounselingtherapy.com, or my email, Marisol at Peaceful Counseling Therapy.